I'm Mary Beth Gilliam, and this is the Outperform Cancer podcast, where we discuss actionable anti cancer strategies found in peer reviewed scientific research. If you've been finding value in this podcast, the best way to support it is to follow the show, leave a comment or rating, and share it with someone you care about. You can also visit outperformcancer.com and sign up for our newsletter. So, what if there was a cancer treatment helping late stage patients live 10 plus years and almost no one knew about it? That's exactly what Kristen Dahlgren discovered. After experiencing a breast cancer diagnosis herself, Kristen was covering a story as a national NBC News correspondent when she discovered something extraordinary: cancer vaccines. This revolutionary breakthrough in cancer treatment was showing incredible life extending results in clinical trials, and yet no one was talking about it. In this powerful episode, Kristen shares her personal story, including why she left her job as an award winning journalist to launch the Cancer Vaccine Coalition. And she gives us a behind the scenes look at how close we are to revolutionizing treatment. You'll learn the science behind cancer vaccines, how they're different from chemo, and what patients should be asking their doctors right now. This breakthrough therapy could reshape cancer care for everyone. Kristen didn't make this life change from journalist to nonprofit CEO just because she had cancer. She did it because she saw a cure on the horizon and the world was living in the dark. These vaccines are not science fiction. They're already extending lives in clinical trials, and patients, scientists, and caregivers can all play a role in pushing this breakthrough forward by joining the Cancer Vaccine Coalition. Kristen tells us her personal story and gives us a behind the scenes look at how close we are to revolutionizing treatment. Whether you're a patient, a survivor, or someone who cares deeply about cancer research, this episode will leave you feeling inspired and ready to take action. Join me in welcoming Kristen Dahlgren. Kristen, thank you so much for coming today.
So happy to be here with you.
I just want to start at the beginning because you have an incredible story and I know everyone's going to want to hear it. You were an award winning NBC correspondent for the Today Show and the Nightly News. And then you make this leap to launch the Cancer Vaccine Coalition, which is a big shift. So please tell us, what inspired you to make such a dramatic change in your life and in your career?
Yeah, it definitely sounds kind of crazy, but the very simple answer is cancer. I mean, I think anyone who's been down this road knows that a diagnosis really changes how you look at life. You reprioritize what's important, how you want to spend your time. And for me, it was really how I wanted to impact the world. I mean, I wasn't thinking very much about cancer at all. My grandmother had had it later in life. And so I thought maybe it would be something that I would have to deal with down the road, but we didn't have a family history of people getting early onset breast cancer. I just had a clear mammogram in May of 2019. And then in September of 2019, I noticed a dent in my breast. Luckily, as a journalist, I had done a story a few years prior about how not everyone presents with a lump when they get breast cancer. And so what I was expecting breast cancer to feel like, in my case, felt very different. But because I had done that story, I knew it was something that I needed to get checked out. Luckily, I did. But yeah, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer when a mammogram had shown no evidence of anything just a few months before. And so that was my first advocacy, if you will. I thought, I'm going to share my story because I think people do need to know. And that message is very clear. It's if you notice something different, a change in your body, nobody knows your body better than you do. Just get it checked out if it's something you're concerned about or notice. And in my case, I really do think that saved my life. So that was kind of where I first went. And then as I went through treatment, I was doing a lot of stories still as a journalist on, cancer treatments and people with cancer. And I was told about doctors who were developing cancer vaccines. And frankly, I didn't believe it. I said, if there were cancer vaccines that were in development in clinical trials, surely I would have heard about it. And when I had a conversation with Dr. Nora Desis from the University of Washington's Cancer Vaccine Institute, and she told me how far along they are. They're in phase 2 trials in multiple cancers. I really thought people need to know about this. And it just so happened that, I'd had this long career of educating and telling people about things. And so it just became this point for me where I was like, I need to get involved in this. And she explained why people didn't know about it. And it's really that scientists are in their silos, they have their heads down, they're working on this great science. Their priority isn't spreading the word about it. They're not working together because they're just busy doing their own thing. And so she had this idea of what if we, brought all these scientists together, and that's what the Cancer Vaccine Coalition is. It's bringing these brilliant scientists to help advance the science, but then also seeing who else we can pull into this. Patients, advocates, people, whose loved one have been through this, caregivers. We're all capable of playing a role in moving this science along through funding, through awareness. And so it just sort of snowballed into this thing. And I was spending so much time on it that it became clear that I really needed to leave my job as a journalist in order to make a difference in this space. And so, yeah, that's what led to this complete 180 in my life. But I feel so driven. I feel so hopeful. And I really want people to know about this. So that's what I've been spending the past year or so of my life doing.
That's pretty incredible. I can identify with what you were saying on a couple of levels. One, that when my initial breast cancer was found in 2007, I was early stage. I'd had a clean mammogram, and I went back 6 months later, and I was like, I'm really sure there's something going on here. And I was told repeatedly, looks good. We don't see anything. And I only because I pushed, because I had heard that not everyone presents the same way, that they were able to find something was indeed wrong, and I was able to be an early stage patient at that point. So I completely agree with you, and I hope that everyone hears that message, continues to get their mammograms, and continues to make decisions for themselves in their own body based on what they believe is going on. So absolutely can identify with that. And also the second half of what you're saying, which is when you have something that wakes you up to our own mortality, right? Like, what are you going to do with the time that you have on earth? It does make you think differently about life and what you can do to help others and make an impact, which you certainly are.
Right. And isn't it a shame, though, that we only kind of think of those things when we're confronted by something like that? When
Yes.
at the end of the day, like we're all going to go at some point, we do
Right.
have limited time. For me, also, I had a recurrent scare where I was having some headaches, and they just, you know, after you have cancer, a headache is never just a headache.
Right.
They didn't think it was anything, but they looked. And when you look, usually find something. So there was this little spot on my brain, and they were like, we don't think it's anything, but I read the report that said suspicious of metastases. And so the only way they could tell was by waiting and seeing if it grew. And so I had this 6-week period of waiting until the next scan. And so for me, that was when I really confronted some of these things of like, oh gosh, if I only have, a short amount of time, what am I going to do? Obviously, spending time with my family and my daughter, was number one. But I also in that time recognized that I wanted to help people and make an impact in
Mhm.
this space. And so even though luckily it turned out to be nothing, I carried that with me of like, I really do want to make an impact. And then when this project came up, for me, that was a moment of this is how I can do that.
Mhm.
Um, and even though, knock on wood, everything was fine there, we all don't know how much
Right.
time we
Right.
have. And so For me, helping others is really the best thing that I can do with my energy. And so I'm really excited about this hope. I'm really
Yeah.
excited that this technology and this science could change this experience for other people. I mean, imagine if we could train our own immune systems, and doctors do think they have the science to do that, to recognize and eliminate cancer. So if you have a tumor, this would be a part of your standard of care. And you wouldn't maybe have to go through the harsh chemotherapy or the radiation or the amputation of your breast in breast cancer. And there are applications in other cancers too. We're seeing pancreatic cancer vaccines with great success in early stage trials. There was a trial of a kidney cancer vaccine, small trial, but 100% of those patients lived for 3 years when they weren't expected to. In
Amazing.
breast cancer, yeah, there was 10 more than 10 years ago now, a vaccine that was given from Dr. Desis at the University of Washington for HER2 positive breast cancer. More than 85% or 85% of the people who had the ideal dose of that vaccine are still alive 10 plus years out when they were late stage breast cancer. And so they weren't expected to have that long of a lifespan. They haven't even been able to calculate the median survival rate because there's so many people still alive. And so it's just really exciting that we can continue to develop that science, answer some of the questions that are still out there, about when to give the vaccine, what the dosage is, what else it's given with to get the best results. But the
Mhm.
science is proving that doctors can get an immune response, and we know what parts of the cancer to target. And now, because of COVID-19 and the development of the vaccine technology there, we have these proven safe vaccine technologies. And so it's this perfect storm of all these things coming together in this moment in time, where now it's just funding, it's awareness, it's, a regulatory pathway for these vaccines to get approved.
Yeah, wow. It is true. Everything that I've read shows that the vaccines, it's not just like another cancer drug. And what I mean by that is, cancer drugs keep coming on, and I've gone to several metastatic breast cancer conferences. Everyone's putting the slides up on the screen and then clapping because there's a 4 month increase in lifespan. And you're like, I'll take the 4 months, but it's really hard to jump up and down about that as a patient. But what you're talking about with these vaccines of patients living, not just 5 years, but 10 plus years. I mean, like that is a massive shift. That is a complete game changer. And I'm sure that must have been what factored in when you were evaluating where were you going to spend your time.
Yeah. And one of my favorite stories from that particular trial, because that was one of the, earlier ones that was showing these great results, they had a reunion of patients around that 10-year mark. And, one of them said, I always felt like a unicorn that I had kind of beaten this disease and lived that long and seen the weddings and the graduations and been around for, family. And then I walked into a room and it was full of unicorns because there were so many other patients that also had gotten that extra time. I get the chills when I think
I
about
know,
it.
I do
That's
too.
what it is. It's time. And being able to extend people's lives with this disease. I've been doing this now, like I said, for over a year. And in the past week, we've had two people who started talking to us early on, who have really bad outcomes. And we need to do this because those people who, are later stage and who are seeing disease progression, they don't have the time to wait for the bureaucratic pieces to get in order and for the funding to happen because somebody's holding on to money, just
Yeah,
it's cancer time.
right.
And so that's the place where I come from is we don't have time to wait around for this. And so it really is this organization, Cancer Vaccine Coalition, to accelerate that. And, we're trying to tell these stories of these people who are impacted by this disease and who need these vaccines today in order to extend their lives, to spend time with their kids, to,
Mhm.
see those future grandkids or whatever it is. We all deserve a shot at a better life without this disease. And then all of the side effects that we see that
Yeah.
people don't realize that go along with it, like
Mm.
those are things that could be lessened with a vaccine. So it's so exciting and hopeful. And I really hope that everybody kind of spreads the word
Yeah.
about to your networks. And, we can get this going, but it's going to take us. We can't wait around for someone else to do it. That's just not how it works anymore.
This is not a one person job. This is, and so I
Right.
love the idea of a coalition. I love the idea of a coalition that includes the scientists as well as the patient community, because we have all of us have something to give too, right? So it's really exciting. And I want to talk a little bit about something to clarify that this vaccine is a therapeutic vaccine that we're talking about, but there's two kinds of vaccines, right? There are therapeutic and there are preventative. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit, because sometimes when I talk to patients, other patients with cancer or who've had cancer in the past, and I say the word vaccine, they think, oh, well, that's not for me because I already have cancer. But that's not the case, right?
Right. And I'm really glad you asked that because it is where, the word vaccine on many levels, people are not understanding right now. So you have infectious disease vaccines that you give, before you get a disease, and then your body would recognize that disease and prevent it. And they have been, wildly successful in preventing and eliminating some really terrible diseases over the past decades. But a vaccine is something that trains your body's immune system to recognize and eliminate a threat. So, a lot of the vaccines, the cancer vaccines that are being worked on right now, are therapeutic. So, that means they're given as part of therapy, cancer treatment. So, if you are diagnosed with cancer, a vaccine would be given as part of your standard of care. It would train your body to recognize proteins on a cancer cell. And then your body would mount its own immune response to that particular, those proteins, those cancer cells, and eliminate them without harming tissue that's healthy. So, like chemotherapy works at killing cancer, but it also kills any other fast growing cells. It's why you lose your hair. It's why people have fingernail issues and all of that during cancer treatment. And so, this is a very targeted therapy that wouldn't harm your healthy tissue. And so that's what's really appealing about it. There are preventative vaccines also being looked at. And so, some people are looking at high risk populations like BRCA populations, or they're recognizing that some of those people may have these certain proteins or may have things in their body that they can try to target. There's a doctor at Oxford that's working on a preventative cancer vaccine that would target breast cancer, lung cancer, and ovarian cancer. And they might try and add other things into that. So
Wow.
those are in development or in, the earliest stage people thinking about it. Here's the thing though, if you're looking at vaccines that take somebody who doesn't have cancer and gives them a vaccine to prevent cancer, that's a very long study that you have. And there's also going to be a really high bar because you're giving it to people who don't have cancer. So you have to see then who develops cancer, what the different endpoints are that they can find along the way to look at those metrics. For somebody who has active cancer, it's a shorter study. And that's where we're doing a lot of the research because you can look at someone who has metastatic triple negative, give them a vaccine, and very quickly compare it to somebody who hasn't gotten that vaccine and see what it's doing. Also, in someone like me, for example, who is no evidence of disease, who went through treatment, eventually we're going to be looking, I think the next phase is at people to prevent recurrence because we know that I've had cancer and you can then give a vaccine and see what happens. The other thing that people are working on, researchers are working on, are these personalized vaccines. So taking somebody's particular tumor and looking at what antigens appear on your specific tumor and making a vaccine just for you. AI is helping in that development. That's like the pancreatic cancer vaccine that I mentioned that's in development at Memorial Sloan Kettering. That's something they're doing, these personalized vaccines. So there's a lot of research going on. We're not sure in the end, which will be the best way to go, which will be the most effective, how you can, use it in different patient populations. But I'm glad you asked that because people do get confused if, is a vaccine only given before you get cancer? And the answer is no. The actual like next and most realistic, my dog is crying back here. The most realistic immediate application is going to be in patients who have active disease.
So that's interesting. If I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is that, these same vaccines very well may, some of them, not the tumor specific, but the more broad antigen based vaccines might in fact become a prevention in the future. But for right now, we're focusing on people who have cancer, who've had cancer, and trying to study them to see if we can prevent it from progressing or coming back.
Right. So part of how the research works on an off-the-shelf vaccine, so something that looks for common antigens that's on all cancers. And so, they're doing tumor typing, they're looking at different tumors that they've, excised from people in the past and seeing what appears the same on all of them. And then that's what they target with these vaccines. So think about it. If you're giving that to people who, have active disease and you see it's working, or you're giving it to somebody who had disease and it's preventing recurrence, well, then, yeah, the next step could be this looks like something that we could give. And then as soon as, God forbid, that person got, a cancer cell in their bodies with those specific antigens on it, then our immune systems would fight it. And so that is, hopefully the future of where this is going. But we really have to support the research that's in the therapeutic settings first, because that's where we'll get our answers. Hopefully, that's where we get the FDA approval. And then we can go from there and see how it's working. But yeah, I mean, the researchers are envisioning a cancer free future. And I love saying that because
That's awesome.
this world without cancer would be a much, much better
A
place.
much better place. It really is amazing. And I think it's so important because it means that what we're talking about today isn't just for cancer patients, it's for everyone. Everyone needs to care about the Cancer Vaccine Coalition and the work that you're trying to do because it could affect all of us in the future, your daughters in the future, your sons, etc., all your loved ones.
I mean, think about, I'm sure everybody knows somebody who's been impacted by cancer. And so, this is the hope for a world where that doesn't happen. And if you're kind of waiting for someone you love to get it, it may be too late at that point. And so that's why we really have to invest in this science now,
Mhm.
because it's going to take a little bit of time to, get the results and get the approval where this is a market for everybody and, used as part of standard of care. And so now is the time to put all of these pieces together.
Yeah.
And, that's where one of our doctors really made a great point where he was saying he was involved in the advent of chemotherapy and those same trials, like what we're doing now in vaccines to get chemotherapy approved as something that really did change the face of cancer care. And he said it didn't happen by these small incremental trials. It happened with a coalition of people working together. And so he sees what we're doing as history repeating itself. And that's just so exciting to think about. This is the future. This is the next, frontier in cancer care is our own immune systems being able to tackle when cancer cells, become too much of a burden. And we all have cancer cells in our body. Like there are errant cells, that have had something happen that make them that cancer cell, they're not normal cells, our immune systems can generally take care of it. But in a lot of cases, it gets to be too much of a burden, and that's where our immune systems can't keep up with it. These vaccines would give us that tool to keep up with the cancer cells, to continue to eliminate them, and to hopefully not develop cancer in the first place.
Yeah, it's really impressive. I think one of the things we can do to help patients is to talk a little bit about how would they go about even talking to their doctor about this. If there are people that are in treatment or in remission, what should they be asking their doctors? How can they find out more information?
Yeah, and I think it's so important to ask about clinical trials too. There's this impression that a lot of people have that clinical trials are like your last resort and only when there's nothing else you can do. I, as part of my treatment, was involved already in three clinical trials to do with my lymphedema and then to do with my radiation. And it was just offered as part of like, we're looking at, for example, the radiation, whether a proton or a photon radiation beam works better. And so I signed up to be a part of that trial. So I think that ask your doctor if there are clinical trials available. Ask them specifically about vaccines. And look, I don't think your doctor is a bad doctor if they don't know about this cutting edge science. It is new technology. It's a newer thing that's being developed, but then they can educate themselves about it. A lot of these trials are happening at the large cancer centers. And so, those doctors may know, but your community oncologist may not know about it. And so you can help to educate and to look up some information on our website, cancervaccinecoalition.org. We have some information, reach out. I'm happy to provide more. There are some clinical trials starting in some of these vaccines. They'll be small at this point, and that's why we really want to get the funding to make these bigger trials so more people have access to these vaccines. And they're in different phases. Like there's some trials coming up for metastatic patients, but there's also some trials coming up for earlier stage patients. And so I think finding out as much as you can, clinicaltrials.org is a good spot to check out what's available in clinical trials. It's not always the easiest to navigate, but it is,
Yeah,
sorry, clinicaltrials.gov.
right. Clinicaltrials.gov. That's right.
Clinicaltrials.gov is a great place to look. It's not always that easy to navigate, but it is the government source for what clinical trials are available. Breastcancertrials.org, I think, is another one where you can find out specifically about breast cancer trials. So, I think as part of your own health advocacy, which is such an important part of this, learning about these trials, about cancer vaccines and what might be available is really important. And that's how we move this forward.
Yeah, that's awesome and great advice. I will throw out another resource that is new. The American Cancer Society has started to help patients try to find clinical trials. And I don't know much about their new tool, but I've been told if you go to their website, you can find it and that it's pretty helpful too. So give that a try.
Yeah. And think about where we would be without the people that participated in chemotherapy trials or radiation trials or some of those, what now is standard of care. We all need to do our part if we can to help
Mhm.
move science forward because we do have so many brilliant researchers who have these ideas and they're trying to bring them to the forefront and get the data that we need to bring these treatments and therapies to everybody. So participating in a clinical trial is a great way to help.
It's a great way to help. And in general, there's, no guarantees for anyone. A clinical trial is not a guarantee. But in general, people who participate in clinical trials tend to have better outcomes. So it's great, I think, to also just be plugged in, know what the latest science is. And if they're experimenting in a clinical trial, it means that there's a lot of data behind that trial leading up to it that says, yeah, we really think this is a good thing. They don't get to clinical trial without a lot of understanding about what's happening on a cellular level and what they expect to happen when they actually implement the trials. So, yeah, I think it's a great thing for all cancer patients. I am signed up to see a doctor to talk about a clinical trial that I might be eligible for a cancer vaccine. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. It's still a couple months out, but I'm already in the queue.
Yeah, and I mean that would be great if you could get it. And I've talked to other people, and they've also said, they get some relief by getting this vaccine, from a mental standpoint of just thinking, okay, I've got an extra layer of protection
Yeah.
here. And I know that my body is working, to prevent anything from coming back or from happening. And so, I wish that there was one that I qualified for. I will be in that line as soon as I can.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. You've talked to so many different research institutions and organizations. You're so plugged in around the world. Are there particular ones that are leading the development of the cancer vaccine? Should we be watching or if we're searching online for information, are there a couple of standouts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you who we're working with, but our coalition is growing. I think that, like I mentioned, University of Washington, they have a lot of great work in different cancers. Memorial Sloan Kettering is a part of our coalition, a doctor at Dana-Farber, Cleveland Clinic, Roswell Park, Emory, MD Anderson. There are some pharmaceutical companies that are working on vaccines. I think Moderna and BioNTech are leading the way there, but there are a lot of small biotechs. Anixa Biosciences is one that's working on a vaccine for triple negative breast cancer, along with the Cleveland Clinic. There's a lot of this research going on, and we're looking to bring all of these together. We're hoping to have a summit with all these, cancer vaccine researchers so that they are all in person and able to share some of the ideas and the data. And that's, I think, where we'll get this sort of brain trust going, and this think tank of, hey, have you tried it here? Have you thought about giving it, as part of this application or along with this ADC therapy? Or, there's just so many different things that they can work with. And that's where monthly we have our doctors meet and talk about things like that. And I'm really excited to get them together with other researchers as well, and pharmaceutical and biotech companies, to just really keep talking about where this research goes. For the first time, the World Vaccine Congress is going to be talking about cancer vaccines. They're talking about whether it's a risky investment in at this, political point in time. So that's another thing to consider, is that, we really need people to be educated about the promise of vaccines so it doesn't get caught up in any type of political maneuvering, because cancer doesn't discriminate by your politics. And, this is something that's given to people who have cancer who are already expected to put toxic chemotherapy into their bodies. And so, we need to make sure that this conversation around cancer vaccines, stays pure and stays focused and isn't caught up in any of that, and that the funding keeps coming in, because without that funding, this research doesn't get made for all of us.
Yeah, and I think you make a huge point, which is quality of life, with chemotherapy is pretty low. And the cancer vaccine has had incredibly good results with safety. As I understand it, not any of the clinical trials have had any major problems. It's what you would expect from a vaccine, a little soreness in your arm for maybe a day or two, maybe a little bit of redness, and then nothing. Then you're fine. Like you don't
Right.
you feel fine. You don't feel any different, as opposed to chemotherapy, which has numerous side effects. So this really is transformational in just how a cancer patient is able to live their life.
Yeah. I mean, just think about it. If you didn't have to go through all of those therapies. As part of the trials, people still get that standard of care. So we're
Yep.
not to the point where we can eliminate chemotherapy yet. It's given in addition to that. But there is that potential and that promise of um, lowering those doses, eliminating them someday. And I
Mhm.
just think to have cancer, not take that toll on your body that it does right now,
Yeah.
be incredible. And then to have that lasting protection would really be just such a change in how we experience this disease.
For sure, for sure. And you were talking about how you bring, Cancer Vaccine Coalition brings together all of these different researchers and organizations and companies, pharma companies. I know that the UK, so outside of the United States, the UK committed to vaccinating 10,000 cancer patients within 5 years. And that was a few years ago, I believe, 2 to 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, I think
Um,
they started actually about a year ago administering those
okay.
vaccines. And so they are far along, and we're in touch with and working with the heads of that program. They do say that the continuation of their research is also dependent on what the United States does and how we're funding and how we're supporting that research through our government and through the NIH and Department of Defense gives a lot of money to breast cancer research. And so they are very closely tied together, which is why it's so important that people in the US understand, because we can't really rely on other countries to get this done. While they are doing great research there and committed to these cancer vaccines across many different cancers, they know that if the US isn't committing and really pushing forward with this science, the US is the biggest market for pharmaceuticals in the world. And so, we are all very closely linked. And it's why I feel such urgency right now to
Mhm.
get this message out and to make sure that our lawmakers understand that these cancer vaccines are therapeutic vaccines. They're really promising. This is our path. We've heard the president say he wants to cure cancer. Our researchers think this is that path forward. And so it's so important that all of us really support it, spread the word, talk to your lawmakers about it, and do what you can to insist on these better treatments.
Yeah, it's so important. I tell my kids, right? They've grown up in this completely connected world. And I constantly tell them there was no internet when I was growing up. There was no, like, we had a typewriter and we were, and I say this, but it's so true. The world is so interdependent now. And we cannot rely on someone else to do this for us. There isn't going to be somebody else that just comes up with the magical cure and then we all benefit. We've got to be a participant. We've got to be involved and engaged. And I'm so glad that you've brought a platform forward, because without the Cancer Vaccine Coalition, we go back to what it was like when you were a reporter, where people are working in individual silos and nobody really knows what's going on. And that is going to take so much longer to get to breakthrough than when you're pulling people together to have these conversations. And that is an impressive mission for your company.
Yeah, I mean, think about all of the major advances, throughout history. A lot of them, the moonshot, it's been done by bringing together brilliant minds, but everyone getting behind these efforts. And I think that's why it's so important. I mean, yeah, I'm a journalist. I never thought I would be in this space. I never thought I'd be working on curing cancer. I still ask myself on a daily basis, what am I doing here? But I think, the answer is why not any of us?
Right.
And that we all really do have this responsibility to do what you can. Not everyone needs to quit their job, but maybe you're able to make a donation to Cancer Vaccine Coalition. Maybe you're able to host an event, to run a race and get people to donate. And so there's something that you can do. You can just tell some friends about it. call someone right now and tell them or text them or,
Put it on
whatever.
Facebook.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Follow us, sign up for our newsletters. And, the more people that we get behind it, the more that it's just not going to be able to be ignored
that's
by
right.
people that do have the funding, whether that's the government, whether it's the billionaires, whatever it is. I think we need people to know about this. And so that's where
Yeah.
we all can play a role.
Starts with awareness for sure. I'd love to hear about someone you've met who actually has had the cancer vaccine. Is there a story or a person that stands out that you could tell us about? Like what it was like for them? Was it scary to participate in a clinical trial and do this? Or what's it like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm thinking of this woman, Diana, who got and shared her story with us. She got what's called STEMVax, so the University of Washington vaccine. And, she's got young kids, and it was recommended by a doctor, and she got a second opinion from another doctor that she respects about whether it was the right thing to do. She said it was a shot and then I think two boosters, and it just was like any other shot. She didn't feel any side effects, but now she, has a different outlook. She still thinks about her cancer, and I don't know if the worry ever goes away, but she does feel like she has this added layer of protection. And we have some testimonials on our website if anyone wants to hear from people who have gotten cancer vaccines. And so, I think there's a lot of excitement with being a part of the clinical trial. I know many people who are signed up like you to get the vaccine as part of a trial or a vaccine. It's not one single vaccine. There are different universities and different companies working on different vaccines, but there's just a lot of hope. And I think for people who have had a diagnosis of cancer, having that hope means everything.
It sure does. It
Yeah.
sure does. So that's why this next question is so important. What are the biggest hurdles still facing cancer vaccines right now? Is it science, regulation, funding, awareness? We've talked about these things or something else. But what's it going to take to bring these vaccines into standard cancer care? Can you tell us about those barriers?
Yeah, I mean, I would have told you 6 months ago that funding was the biggest issue, and it is still a huge issue. Trials are expensive. Now, I would say an additional piece of that is the regulatory pathway, mostly because we just don't know what that looks like yet. There's a lot of changes happening. Hopefully, those result in a streamlined path forward for this. I worry personally about vaccine hesitancy and cancer vaccines getting caught up in that greater debate. Cancer is not an infectious disease. This would never be mandated. As we talked about, these aren't necessarily for prevention, they are really for therapy. So, people who have active disease. And so, this should not be a part of any debate over other vaccines. We'll leave that aside. This is for people who are facing, life threatening cancer diagnoses. It will be an additional tool, hopefully a more effective tool than anything we have
Mhm.
to eliminate that disease without harming the rest of your body. And so I think those are really the two things. And so I'm going to bucket it into funding and awareness again, because I think when people understand what cancer vaccines are, and I haven't heard any hesitancy from someone who actually has had cancer,
Yeah,
they're
right.
all very excited about this.
Yeah.
And, and I really haven't seen a huge pushback, to be honest,
Good.
from anyone, because I think cancer vaccines are seen as very different. And maybe you can call them like immune activating therapies or something else if that makes you feel better than, using the vaccine word. But that's what it is. It is training your own immune system to fight off cancer. And so that's where I think we need people to be aware that that's even a possibility.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I know the Cancer Vaccine Coalition has already made great progress on both of those measures. I've seen, first of all, I see you all over the country in media where you're, and I'm like, how did she get from one coast to the other so fast? Because she was just there on the morning news and now she's in LA. So I know that you're traveling the country and probably the world trying to raise awareness. I also know that you've raised money and that money is going towards vaccine trials. Can you just tell us a little bit about your biggest wins? Like, what are you most proud of that you've accomplished in this very short period of time since Cancer Vaccine Coalition has been around?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm most proud of just seeing the conversation change where I hadn't heard anything about cancer vaccines. Now, people do know what we're doing and they are talking about cancer vaccines. We're seeing, this incredible research. I'm not going to take credit for it, but everything it's gaining momentum and I think that's really important. I'm excited about the Cancer Vaccine Summit that we'll be hosting in the fall and getting everybody together. I'm, just really eager to continue to travel the country and spread the word about this. And then there is the funding piece. So we were able to secure a $2 million matching gift. And so, all donations up to $2 million are matched on our website. And
Wow.
yeah. And so that money is going to be going to clinical research. And so we're funding our first two trials in the next few months. And so, all of these things that really continue to build momentum and bring this research forward to a point where, I think we're going to see a snowball effect where it just, once we start seeing more and more data, and what we're doing is we're de risking it essentially. So if we fund these phase 2 trials and then pharmaceutical companies, biotechs, the government, whoever sees the data from those trials and how effective this is, then we'll see more and more investment into this space. And so, that's where we're building this momentum and this movement.
Fantastic. So let's wrap up with your priorities for the upcoming year. So, how can we support your mission? What do we have to look forward to? You mentioned already in the fall, you have a summit. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about what you're doing in the upcoming year?
Yeah, I think just a reminder that, this is not just a coalition of brilliant scientists. This is a coalition of all of us. And so I really look forward to this growing. And I do see it as a movement where we stand up and we say, okay, enough. There is science for better treatments. So why are we waiting around for it? And so, I'm excited to see our social media continue to grow at Cancer Vaccine Coalition. And I'm excited, for our newsletter to grow. We're continuing to keep people updated. We'll be having more trials open as we are able to fund more. And so, I'm excited to get the word out to people that there are these trials that you can sign up for so
Mhm.
that people, who are now battling this disease can get this vaccine, can prove that it's effective. And so I just think we're at this point, we're at a tipping point for vaccines. And hopefully we are the force that really gets this over the edge. And the goal remains a cancer vaccine, a breast cancer vaccine to market in 5 to 10 years or less. And a win in breast cancer vaccines is a win in any solid tumor cancer and vice versa. And so we're supportive of all of this cancer vaccine research that's going on. And so I think even if you're not impacted by breast cancer, but another type of cancer, it's really important that you support us, that you do your part and, spread the word about this and make a donation if you can, because all of that is going to make a difference.
Well, I can't wait to see how things unfold. We will certainly be following you and looking forward to the summit in the fall. And I just want to thank you so much for being so open, for sharing your story, and for sharing all your time.
Well, thank you so much.
And now, an important announcement. All the information that was provided today was for educational purposes only. I'm a patient, just like you. I am not a licensed or accredited physician, therapist, or clinical researcher. All information provided is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, therapist, nutritionist, or any other qualified healthcare professional.